Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:07. It's O'Connor and Company here this Friday morning, June 28th, the last day of June, and the day after what could be one of the most historic presidential debates in our history, and that's saying something. We've got you full coverage and analysis and review of what happened last night and the way forward, not just for the Democrats and their petty concerns about the election, but our larger question about the future of our nation as it becomes apparent that the executive branch of our government is in the hands of a man who is not capable of getting through the day. Something we've been discussing for quite some time, but was certainly validated for everyone in the world to see last night in 90 minutes on CNN. We'll get to all of that this morning. Plus, at 6:35, Todd Bensman, Center for Immigration Studies, on the debate focus on the border. And then at 8:05, our pal Matt Schlapp, I think, has plenty to say about this coming up. I'm Larry O'Connor with Patrice Onwuka.
Hey, good morning. Happy Friday, Larry.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
This is a Friday that's come just in time, I think. I think we're all...
we can now take a breather, hopefully. Yeah. There's not a major news day today. Let's hope.
I'd love to hear from you at 888-630 WMAL. In fact, Russ from Winchester has been hanging on. And we're going to get things started with this call because then that'll sort of help us spin into some review of what we saw last night. Many people are focusing on Joe Biden's voice, his appearance to be weak, loses train of thought, incapable of completing a coherent sentence. And again, the side-by-side contrast. Boy, when CNN did that split screen, and you could see the contrast between these two candidates, it was overwhelming.
Stark.
But there was more, Russ, to Biden's performance that I think have negative ramifications for the man who wants to be president for 4 more years. Go ahead, Russ.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I'm going to make a couple of points, and then I'll hang up and let you comment. First and foremost, I think that there was a response by the Democrat leadership and pundits of like an unfaithful spouse that now they've been saying, you're going to believe us or your lying eyes, and our lying eyes are the ones that have told the truth. Yeah. Secondly, I think that Mr. Biden just looked vacuous. And when Mr. Trump told certain facts, Biden had a look on his face like, really? Nobody ever told me that.
Right. Right. I've never heard this sort of thing before. Yeah.
Exactly. And you could just see the incredulous look on his face. I think that the signs of dementia are having had a family member with that died from effects of dementia. I see it in him, and then finally, I think there's evidence that afterwards that maybe somebody should inquire into elder abuse, not just from the leadership, whoever's pulling the strings in the background, but Jill Biden should be ashamed of herself for allowing her husband has been and to be puppeted over these last few years. It's just embarrassing and it's shameful.
Russ, thank you for those observations.
Thank you,
I think that you hit
Terrific
each one
stuff.
Perfectly. Yeah.
Terrifically.
Patrice, it was, I think, honestly, I have nothing to add to what Russ from Winchester said.
He hit so many good points. I'll just say on the point about Biden seeming vacuous, the look on his face, but he also, and people have noted it, he missed opportunities. He wasn't using his time effectively. He could have pivoted to policy points. He missed opportunities to talk about what he actually accomplished, and instead was very much on the defense the entire time. And so he didn't utilize his time very well, and maybe that's because he was just overwhelmed. Maybe that was because he just wasn't capable.
Let's give you a couple of highlights here. And by the way, for those of you who are waiting, we are going to get to our guests in this hour, or in this half hour, I should say, John Malcolm Heritage Foundation. He'll be joining us in just a moment. But I want to just sort of tie up this conversation about the debate last night with some audio, because you may just be waking up and you may have gone to sleep before this was over. Here's a perfect sort of moment. It's cut number 2 here, if you could Mr. Shelton. Listen to Joe Biden doing something that we've seen for quite some time, and the media can't tell us they don't know about it. They have been running interference for this man, but here it was in the starkest possible display of his inability to keep a coherent thought. Go.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
You know, I talked about the visual of the split screen. That was an audio version of the split screen right there.
Yes.
Where you could hear President. Again, it shows his physical incapabilities right now, but it also showed Donald Trump strong, in command, and able to pivot and improvise on the words he just heard and say, and deliver a pretty good one-liner.
Yes.
One more, cut 13, David Plouffe. This is the guy who was sort of the engineer of the Obama campaigns back in the day. Listen.
Really pains me to say this. They're 3 years apart. They seemed about 30 years apart tonight, and I think that's going to be the thing that voters really wrestle with coming out of this.
Yeah.
Great point.
It is, except that it sort of focuses only on age. And yes, he looked old. He looked older than 81. He's an old 81. But it's not age. This is not age. There's more going on here than just age. There is a mental situation.
Decline. Yeah.
All right, Patrice. One other cut here that I want to get to, and that is, how do you defend this, right? Well, here's Jen Psaki, cut 14.
He did improve as the night went on. His voice improved. His answers improved. He had a couple of moments. I thought his answer on calling out Trump's criminality was pretty good. He was a little garbly on abortion. If you're the campaign, you're going to push out the best moments. There were a couple on social media. But it's not the debate they wanted. I think the biggest challenge for them, and Nicole's been talking about this a little bit, and we've sat in similar chairs, is how distracting all of the chatter is going to be, which we're all getting on text, on email, about whether he should be replaced. That chatter is happening. People are asking questions. I don't mean it's from the American public writ large, and we don't know how they feel, and we won't know for some time. And if you look at history, this may not impact them at all. But the chatter is very distracting, and it's going to be very consuming for the campaign. Should he be replaced? They're going to be answering that question instead of breaking through on attacking Trump.
Okay. Well, again, the chatter is distracting. It's distracting us from our job, which is to stay in power.
Well, here's the funny thing about Jen Psaki. She was really good at her job of being a liar and distracting, frankly. But we know where the American people are going into this debate. President Biden is actually behind in almost all of the battleground states, and within the margin of error within one or the last two remaining. So we actually do know where the American people are, and Biden is the one who's behind. So this is not going to help his. This performance last night will not help him move back into the front leader status.
No,
and
not
being
with regard to November. And again, I want to keep reiterating and reminding everyone, beyond November, or well before we even consider who wins in November and whether Biden should be on the ticket so the Democrats can stay in power. What about today, as the work of the nation needs to be done by a president and the head of the executive branch? Nobody thinks that this man is capable of doing the job today. Forget about running for the office. And yes, we do have a good idea of what the American people believe, because CNN has already done a flash poll on this, and the debate watchers have chimed in. 67% say that Trump won, over 33%. And honestly, the 33% who think Biden did a better job, they need some medical intervention too. It is 6:50.
Making sense of the headlines, because common sense isn't so common. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
Now, if you're looking at the calendar and saying, hey, today's the last working day of June, and there's still a whole lot of decisions that we should be expecting from the Supreme Court, are they all going to flood in today? Yeah, it's a good question. So let's bring in someone who might have the answer. John Malcolm, Heritage Foundation, who knows his stuff with regard to the Supreme Court. Good morning, John. Thank you for joining us this early.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
First, before we get to the decisions we have yet to hear, can you sort of flesh out this Idaho abortion decision yesterday? I know that it appears that the Supreme Court has allowed these emergency abortions in Idaho, and they have, but was this a sweeping sort of reversal on Dobbs, or is this a major decision that will have ramifications across the country? What was this abortion decision?
Well, it wasn't. It was a non-decision, actually. So these were a pair of consolidated cases, Moyle versus United States and Idaho versus United States. And the Supreme Court, this is an inside the court term, they digged it, D-I-G, meaning they dismissed the case as improvidently granted. They decided, yes, at the time we thought that this was a good case for us to hear, but there have been developments since this case, so we are going to dismiss it and allow the lower courts to consider the issue before it comes back up to us. In the meantime, though, Idaho, that they will be able to perform emergency abortions, not just to save the life of the mother, but also for, very serious disorders. So 3 of the justices just said, look, here are the reasons why we've decided to dismiss this case. The federal government has changed its tune a little bit. It said, for instance, that we can't force Idaho to perform abortions for expectant mothers who are having mental problems, that we can't override the conscience protections of abortion, of doctors and nurses who don't want to perform abortions. And the state said, yes, I know our law says that you only perform emergency abortions if the life of the mother is in jeopardy, but there are certain really, really, really serious conditions in which we would permit a doctor to perform these abortions. And the state also raised, for the first time, a new argument. They said, look, this emergency law that the federal government passed, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, known as EMTALA, that was at issue, that doesn't bind us, the states. That binds hospitals that receive federal funds, gives them certain requirements. We never agreed to those requirements. We don't get any money, and therefore that law cannot preempt or take precedence over our law, our abortion law. 3 of the justices, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, made it quite clear that, if they had to make this decision today, they would rule in favor of the Biden administration and say that Idaho's law has been preempted. And Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas, they would decide the issue now and said that they would rule against the Biden administration and say that Idaho's law ought to take precedence. But there were a majority of the justices, particularly Kagan and Sotomayor, who made clear which way they would go if forced to vote. They joined Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Roberts in terms of saying we should dismiss this case and let the lower courts deal with it first.
So we're speaking with John Malcolm of Heritage Foundation. John, we don't have a lot of time left, but wanted to get your read on the several pending cases. In particular, I'm watching the Chevron case. So just can you rattle through what we have left to see?
Yeah, and we will not get all the cases today. They added an opinion day on Monday, so they will issue some cases today and probably the rest of them on Monday. The administrative law case you talked about, so Chevron is an old case that said basically when the law is vague or unclear, courts should not come up with their own best interpretation. They should defer to the interpretations of executive branch agencies if that interpretation is reasonable. And the court has been asked to overturn this doctrine called the Chevron doctrine in a pair of cases, one called Loper-Bright, the other called Relentless, to say, no, it's up to courts to come up with the best interpretation of a law. They should never defer to executive branch agencies in that regard. And I think that's what the court is going to do. We also have, of course, a couple of social media cases, the net choice cases. Florida and Texas passed laws trying to regulate social media platforms and what they can take down and keep up. The court's going to determine the constitutionality of those laws. And we have the Trump presidential immunity case still to be decided. Yeah, that's a big one. And there are 3 others. There's one involving when the statute of limitations runs for agency actions. That's the Corner Post case. There's a January 6th case, the Fisher case, about whether a post-Enron law applies for, a document destruction law applies to disrupting an official proceeding. That also could have an impact on one of the cases pending against Donald Trump. And then there's this wacky case out of the Ninth Circuit in which the Ninth Circuit held that a city in Oregon cannot impose any kind of a fine or criminal penalty against a homeless person. It would violate the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishments clause to do so if there isn't sufficient public housing available.
Yeah, that one I'm keeping an eye on. That will have, hopefully, the effects of that will be widespread nationwide in terms of what cities can do in terms of fining or arresting people for public vagrancy, criminal vagrancy.
Yeah.
The idea that the Ninth Circuit said, no, you can't arrest somebody for breaking laws against vagrancy unless you use tax dollars to provide a shelter for them. That has been utilized by state of California and cities all across the country to sort of rationalize not enforcing public vagrancy laws, and that's why we've seen this explosion. Huge decisions still coming.
Very
my gosh.
big decisions.
And we will see some today at 10 a.m., yes?
Yep, we certainly will, and there'll be more on Monday, and then the Supreme Court will hightail it out of town.
Yeah. John Malcolm, Vice President for the Institute for Constitutional Government and Director of the Mighty Meese Center and Simon Center at the Heritage Foundation. Great stuff as always, John. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
It is 6:24.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:36. It's O'Connor and Company, the day after the debate, this last working day of the month of June. Thanks for joining us. Coming up at 8:05, our friend Matt Schlapp from CPAC will give us his take from last night's unmitigated disaster, not just for the Democrats, but honestly for our nation. I recognize the politics of this and how it affects the election, but good Lord, could we please say a prayer for our country, which is being led today by a man who was incapable of making it through a 90-minute conversation to talk about himself and his policies. Joe Biden is unfit to be commander-in-chief. It is so clearly obvious. If you have children in the military who are subject to this man's orders, please, my heart goes out to you right now as you witnessed exactly what the chain of command goes all the way up to right now in our military. We'll get into all of that. It's Larry O'Connor. That's Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
And it's a Friday. Good morning.
It sure is. And listen, if you were hoping that Donald Trump would focus like a laser beam on the single most important issue in this campaign, and that is Joe Biden's abject failure to secure our border. Actually, I shouldn't even call it a failure because it sure looks deliberate. He deliberately reversed the policies that had a relatively secure border and purposely allowed in millions of people. And then we see the criminal activity of many of those illegal immigrants playing out every single day in the headlines. If you wanted Trump to focus on that, you got the debate you wanted. Here's a perfect example of it in cut 4. Let's hear that, Michael.
On the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do is leave it.
Yeah, and he went on and on. Todd Bensman joins us. He's a fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies, and he wrote the book Overrun, How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Border Crisis in U.S. History. Todd, I mean, performance aside and the concerns about Joe Biden's physical and mental capabilities aside, on the substance, on the issues, it wasn't even close last night, was it? We got a clear message from the man who wants to resume office and take over the border security job.
Right. I think it was obvious that Donald Trump understands that the polls are showing that Americans absolutely hate this out-of-control border crisis that's been going on since Inauguration Day 2021. He hammered it. He never stopped hammering it all the way home. He raised every issue associated with it, terrorist crossing. They're going to wreck Social Security eventually. They are committing heinous crime. He correctly noted that the border was under historic control at the end of the Trump term. and that it was immediately reversed. All of those gains were immediately reversed, and the border torn open. He pointed out that Biden absolutely did it. His people did it, and that maybe Biden didn't even know that it was being done, because for the first 3 years, Biden didn't say a word about it. He wouldn't even go down there. Remember?
Yeah.
Yes.
They officially they were all about just denying that there was anything happening at all the way up until just recently. And there was Joe Biden bringing up that the border, the numbers are down by 40%. And Trump said, well, yeah, okay, there's a slight thing, but you only just did that for the campaign. You just did that like a few minutes ago. Biden just could never get out from under the magnifying glass spotlight on this issue. I think Trump has a sort of inherent understanding that this is definitely his most vulnerable hind spot.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why you saw President Trump keep coming back to immigration, and he attacked immigration and the southern border from an economic standpoint, talking about black jobs, or he attacked it from a public safety standpoint, talking about, the girls who've been murdered, brutalized and murdered because of illegal immigrants coming through the southern border. I'd love to tackle this Biden claim that he was endorsed by the Border Patrol. Can we play cut 16, Michael? And then I'll ask you to respond to it, Todd.
We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. Significantly, by the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position.
Did the Border Patrol actually endorse President Biden? And what does it mean? Where is law enforcement on the border when it comes to these candidates?
I mean, during the debate last night, Border Patrol Union tweeted out, absolutely, we are not endorsing Joe Biden. The Border Patrol hates Joe Biden more than any union that I've ever known or seen. I mean, Trump absolutely nailed it when he said, there's no police union or police association in the country that supports you, but the top of the apex agency out there is Border Patrol. I mean, I spent a lot of time with the Border Patrol. It is just white phosphorescent hatred about this president. Now, there was one moment when a Border Patrol Union leader during the Langford, when they first put the Langford bill out there, where for one day they said, yeah, we support this because there was a pay issue involved in it. But the rank and file attacked their leadership on that, and that endorsement was withdrawn in about 24 hours. Yeah. So Trump should have pointed that out, but he did just fine. Border Patrol hates this president, and they love Donald Trump, and that's just the way it is.
Well, Todd, and again, I know that you work at Center for Immigration Studies, so obviously immigration policy and the border is something that's central to you, and Joe Biden attempted yesterday, as he and his administration and Democrats and the media have attempted to do for many months now, to sort of hook this back onto Republicans because of that failed attempt with Senator Langford in a bipartisan bill that was going to be a disaster. Do you think that dog won't run anymore, or hunt, or whatever the phrase is? They've been trying to do it, and Biden tried it last night, and it crashed and burned again. Are we finally past that lie that Republicans are responsible for the crisis at the border?
I think so. I mean, that's all they got. They have that one thing, and they Langford just only recently handed that to them. Yeah. Within just a few months. I mean, they don't even know what to do with it, really. But I don't know why Langford. I'll still never understand why the Senate Republicans did what they did there. It was a terrible blunder, an absolutely stupid bill. That bill codified 5,000 a day from 0 a day in the current law to 5,000 a day, and did a bunch of other things like that. It was a terrible bill. It did nothing at all. Trump, every time, I think they're ready for him if they keep trying to pull that. Okay. I was watching MSNBC last night because I wanted to know what they were thinking about the the debate and the performance. And the panel that they had on were like, we have to figure out whether we can get a replacement for this guy. That's what they were talking about last night.
It was just
that
side. Bad. Yeah, Todd Bensman. In fact, we're going to talk about that in just a moment, about what the Democrats do there and this whole idea of replacing him, and how that sort of actually reveals quite a bit about who they are as a party. Right now, we'll get to that in a moment. But Todd, we're out of time with you. Thank you so much for joining us, Center for Immigration Studies.
Thank you for having me.
And his book, Overrun, How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Border Crisis in U.S. History, is a primer on exactly how we got here and, well, how we can get back. Okay, our breakdown of yesterday's debate continues, and we do want to hear from you at 888-630-9625 as we hit our 7 o'clock hour. We'll reset and start and play a lot of the audio of last night's performance of Joe Biden, showing to the world that he's not only incapable of continuing on the ticket, but also I don't think he's capable of continuing in office. And I think that's honestly, by the way, the only way they get rid of him. They cannot convince him to step down from the ticket and yet still maintain, but he's fine being president. You know,
so just move her into the Oval Office and move him out to
I don't like Kamala Harris. Listen, I get it, and I know everyone's saying, "Oh no, keep Biden right there. We want to run against him because he's feeble." I get that, I do, but for God's sake, people, we still need a president. We need a functioning government. We need a commander-in-chief who is, capable of understanding the dilemma that our troops might be facing at any given time. I don't like Kamala Harris. Trust me. But if you've got a child in the military right now and you know that this is the man who was delivering orders in the chain of command that puts your child in harm's way, you won't sleep for the rest of the year. One other thing, Patrice, if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
We've been discussing about Democrats all over cable news last night saying, well, people are right now figuring out how they can get rid of Joe Biden off the ticket and replace him with Gavin Newsom or replace him with Michelle Obama or replace him with Kamala Harris. And I just found the irony is really rich. For years now, we've been hearing that Donald Trump being president is a threat to democracy, right?
Yes.
These people are openly discussing removing a man who Democrats have voted for.
Yes.
We've gone through the primary process. They set up the whole thing. And now they're, we got to figure out how we can, through basically a coup, remove him from the ticket because they want to retain power and replace him at a convention without one Democrat voter outside of that 2,000 group super delegates that they get to select to put at the convention. Yep. The pro-democracy, democracy is on the line. We're going to lose our democracy if Donald Trump is elected. They're the ones who are now saying that a handful of power brokers are going to select who the candidate is and thwart the will of every single Democrat who voted in the primary. I just find that irony too rich to not point out.
It's remarkable. But listen, we've already seen a preview. They've tried to use lawfare. They've tried to use the legal process to remove President Trump from the ballot in several states. And the Supreme Court roundly slapped down those efforts and said, oh, no, you don't. So at the end of the day, it's remarkable what the left will do to keep power. They don't care who's in office. They don't care who gets hurt. They don't care about issues. They don't care about Americans. They care about keeping their power. And however they can do it and whomever they use to get it done, they will.
It's 6:53.